We'll bring this meeting to order. We do have a quorum. We have all participants here. All committee members are here. We also have Mr. Yenzo, Ms. Dodson, and Mr. Weigold listening in. And we have 4 other attendees, Ms. Stidel, Mr. Crosby, Ms. Bittenhausen, and the president of the board, Mr. Farmer, is on listening. All right, so we will start. I really don't have a chairman's report. There's not that much going on right at the moment. I did want to say, does everybody know that the NCAC is going to meet this month?
My understanding is that it will.
Yes.
By teleconference.
Yeah, I've been invited.
Karen's on it now. I'm not on it anymore, but Karen, you're on it. I think
we're going to have a Zoom meeting on May 20th at 6:30, and at that meeting, Paul and I will both be sworn in, along with whoever else was elected.
Good, good. Yeah, I've been invited to attend and give a report again. So, other than that, I have nothing. So we move on to public comment. Is there any comment from the public, Haley?
Yes, it looks like Crosby would like to speak, so I will conference him in.
Great.
Crosby, please unmute yourself.
There he is.
I think I'm live here.
Yep. Go right ahead, Crosby.
Okay. This is a suggestion for a potential future agenda item for the committee.
Okay.
The district is going to have to provide quite a bit of test data to the consultant for the urban water management plan. And I'm not sure we really have that all organized, or if we even have all the data that we need. I think it would be helpful if the committee would collaborate with the staff to look at how much data we actually have from the tests of the advanced water treatment plan in 2015, and even possibly from the tracer tests, to see if we have enough information to correlate the amount of injection that we do with the actual well levels in that area. That's going to be needed to show how running the advanced water treatment plant benefits the water supply. Some of the testing that was done before, like the tracer test, was done for a particular purpose, but if we have enough information about well levels and so forth, we might be able to use that information to help establish, when do you have to turn the advanced water treatment plant on, how many hours a day do you have to run it, and all that kind of stuff. If you read through the contract for the urban water management plan consultant, there's several places in there saying, well, if we don't have the data that we need from the district, it's going to cost you more. So it's important that we try to get our ducks in order before that. I'm sure the board will discuss this possibly on Thursday, but I think this committee should be thinking about possibly putting that on a future agenda. Thank you.
Okay, so that would be to discuss whether we can help provide more information then, huh? Okay, very good. Anyone else? Haley?
I have no other comments at this time.
Okay, very good. So we are on to the agenda itself, and the first part of the agenda is consideration to approve the April 13, 2020 regular meeting minutes and special meeting minutes, the consent agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I can't. Yeah, I should be moving it because I'm the secretary.
Okay.
I'll move it then.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay.
I do have one
Moved
question.
by Mr. Nugent and seconded by Ms. Dean. All in favor, raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5-0, it passes. Very good.
Did we ever figure out who the person that belonged to that phone number was? So they're not listed?
It wouldn't be listed, no.
No, okay.
Okay.
I remember we asked them, "Hey, who are you?" Or please, say who you are. No one, I heard silence, so I don't know who it was. It was a,
Yeah, nobody's
it was
fessed
a
up.
San Francisco number. Doesn't mean anything, of course. It could be a mobile number, but it was,
Right.
it was unidentified. So.
Okay. All right, we move on to regular business. And the first one is a discussion and consideration regarding resources and infrastructure committee bylaws and forwarding to the board of directors for approval. This was merely the date change. Did everybody get a chance to look that over? It was part of the packet that you received. Okay. Any discussion? Anybody on the attendees? No, it doesn't look like the attendees are. Haley, anybody from the attendees want to speak on this particular issue?
I do not have any attendees raising their hand to speak on this issue.
Thank you. All right, so no discussion. I'll entertain a motion to approve the new bylaws as revised.
I move to approve it.
I moved a second.
Okay. Ms. Dean made the motion and Mr. Gray seconded. Can I have a show of hands again as to all those in favor? All right, 5-0. Very good. Okay. Move right along here. Excellent. We're now at item number 3B, which is a report from the Ad Hoc Committee on Water and Demand Report, on the Water Demand Report. Sorry there. So, Tom, are you going to lead this discussion or is Karen?
With I can do it with Karen and Brad's permission. Obviously, they can jump in.
Okay.
I guess give some little background on this that you probably have. All of us, I think, here are familiar with the history of this. This started out now about a year ago as a report, ad hoc committee being named when Don Howell was chairman, to look into, in a general sense, what our demand looks like going forward. And also, we were also tasked to look at potential demand effects from conservation program, from the demand offset program. We proceeded to collect data on water usage going back as far as we could with as much specificity as we could, and both build usage and production to try to develop a picture for what we could expect going forward, reasonably expect going forward. And the result was initially presented to this committee in November of last year, I believe, as a tentative report. It was briefly discussed, and then it was decided to put it on hold for further consideration, and that gave us, in a sense, an opportunity to update it a little bit, because we had the data up to 2018. Now it's up to through 2019 for build usage. The general picture that we developed was that in terms of what has happened in the past, there was a steady overall decrease in per capita use on the residential level, and a fairly dramatic decrease during the latest drought, with a bounce back about maybe halfway back in the aftermath of the drought. And at this point, after about 6 years or 7 years after the onset of the drought, the per capita use and overall use generally seems to be sort of plateauing at a new level, which would fit the historical pattern. So we have data that analyzes per capita use, per connection use. It breaks out commercial, residential, and licensed vacation rental use, and seeks to show all those things kind of in an overview of the past. maybe the main thrust of this study, though, is not so much to give data, just present data, which we assume that will be done again with the urban water management plan, but more to identify the areas where we don't really have, or that we need better data, more precise data to make a fairly reasonable prediction about the future. There are some significant gaps. One of them, which is we talked about earlier, was the lack of complete data on the status of the conservation demand offset program. That data will probably be collected at some point. I mean, they're working on it now at the staff level. But we identified some other areas where there are unknowns that would be good when we engage the consultant for the urban water management plan update to either collect our own data on, CCSD data, and also to direct their attention to these things, because these are crucial issues for demand, for predicting demand 20 years out, which is what the UMWP is supposed to do. Maybe the most interesting one and the most difficult one to pin down is the number of the actual demand by part-timers and full-timers versus full-timers, and how many part-timers there are, how much time they spend here, how much they count for the overall residential demand. All these things are quite mysterious because we don't really have a number for how many people live here part-time. We have the census data we use, which is from two sources. One is the decennial census, which the new one's just being taken now. And then this survey they do every year, which has a 5-year running average of things, which has a very high margin of error, called the American Community Survey. Those two sources give us what's called a vacancy rate of about almost a third of the housing units in Cambria. But we don't know for sure, which of those are vacation rentals, which of those are truly vacant, which of those are part-time residences. We do some guessing on that, but one of the things that we think should be really looked at carefully, and maybe through a survey or whatever, is let's find out how much potential there is for added water use if people who are now part-time, or the units that are now part-time, became full-time. That's one of the key sort of outside scenarios we have to look at. Other scenarios are what if you have demographic changes? Because Cambria has been, the census data suggests this, Cambria has been, over the last 2 decades, becoming somewhat more of a part-time versus full-time community. It's hard to pin down because the numbers are quite, has a high margin of error, but the full-time population seems to be diminishing somewhat. The part-time population would be increasing, but of course you don't know how many people, what the equivalent of that in the full-time sense. Some people could be here like a couple days a month. Some people could be here for 2 weeks a month, so that's very difficult to pin down. We also think you need to look at what the impact of the ADU initiative is on the state and county level, because the county has just updated its ordinance on secondary units, but the state is pushing very hard to have those built and making it easier for people to build them. What that does to overall usage, but also the number of connections and so forth. And so I think the key part of this report is where we deal with these the questions. What is it we don't know and what we need to know in the when you're working with the consultant. We're not trying to, obviously, this is not like a rough draft of the urban water management plan or anything. We're not trying to sort of do the final word on data, and I assume the data will be updated when in the plan, but we want to give them and give the CCSD some idea of the questions asked and what needs to be settled. That's just a brief rundown of it. There's a couple other things questions we ask on that I think the chairman was interested in. One is that questions of the question of part-timers. What would be the scenario? What would be the worst case, a reasonable worst case scenario, for instance, if all the part-time units became full-time, both under the current the current number of buildings, the current number of units, and also under build out. Another one would be, how do we account for the gap between production and consumption and build use? It's highly variable, but it is, on the order of say 10 and 11% roughly, with wide swings. What might be done about that to make it smaller? Is it possible there'll be more consumption within the same amount of water production, for instance, through certain steps? We don't really know, for instance, on that score, what the age of the water meters is on average, and we don't have data on what we know about something about leakage and so forth, but there's a lot of work to be done still to figure out what's going on there. The question of commercial use, is it going to remain the same percentage of residential use if residential use goes up, or is its growth potential less than residential if you have build out, so forth? So that I know I'm not going to go down in detail about that, the last part of the report, but that is, I think, what we're aiming at with our analysis, is to sort of ask the questions.
Good,
Yeah.
good. On one of those points, Ray, I don't know if you were listening to all that, but as you've been talking to new meter people, have they given you an idea as to what percentage is not being recorded by our ancient meters currently, and what they would see as a increase in consumption overall?
No, they didn't specifically address that, because typically, a new meter is supposed to be about 99% accurate, even over a 5-year span. There is going to be some new, I want to say, legislation or regulation that's coming on board where you have to replace 10% of your meters every year, just to handle those uncertainties. But no, they didn't get specifics on they didn't analyze, like, the current state of our meter and say, like, yeah, you guys have 7 to 10% or whatever it is that we would expect for something like that. It was basically like, those meters need to be replaced. This is what we have to offer.
Now, generally, the old meters underread, right? Not overread.
Yeah, typically.
Okay, good. So we don't really have any data specifically on that. Paul, you have a comment, discussion?
I guess it's comment and question maybe for Ray is we're seeing the variances per month basically per billing cycle with this. And I guess that, to me, from an outsider, doesn't lead me to believe that that's related to meters under reading, because meters under reading would be consistent, or at least you'd think that they would be consistent. So I'm trying to figure out, like, is there anything else that, is it like we have a master meter that's read on a certain day, and that, additional meters are read on, variable days afterwards, and there can be some sort of loss between those days, if that makes any sense?
Well, I think if you're asking about the issue of if the issue of unaccounted for water, basically the difference between build and production in general, that by the way, we are going through a leakage audit right now of our entire system. We're going through it in phases at the moment. The first phase is done, but because obviously, like, a lot of this water, it'll vary year to year depending on, for example, there were certain leaks that happened over a certain year or certain season that didn't happen in another season or in another year. Those are going to be the major variances. There also could be situations where we did some flushing, sometimes that's unaccounted for, that more so than others. We try to account for it as much as we can. We estimate it, different things like that, or even putting tanks out of service. Sometimes some of that water gets unaccounted for, but typically we want to account for that as best as we can. So those are the minor variances that would fall between the 10-12%, whatever range. We are still within the American Water Works standards of unaccounted for water, even though we still want to improve in those things. We are within tolerance, but we definitely want to improve because water is definitely a precious commodity here. So, but yeah, there is going to be variances, and I don't attribute it all of that, or even a big part of it to meter difference.
I know there's one we couldn't attach the big Excel spreadsheet with all the year-to-year data on these things, but there was all of you will probably remember that big leak for which they built, you built that temporary pipe across Santa Rosa Creek and the bridge. That leak seemed to be, it was enormous. Actually, its effect on the overall gap that year was, 30 or 40 acre feet.
Yeah.
So little of that, there are some leaks now and then. There's significant leaks that do kind of skew that number off the average. But in terms of, as Ray was saying, it's generally around 10%, with about a 2 or 3 percentage point deviation.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, Karen, anything you would like to add to Tom's report?
I think Tom pretty well covered it. And, we all know that by no means is this a final done report ever because of all the unknown information that we don't have. And so if the committee approves it, we probably will keep on working on this report as more information comes. But we tried to get this caught up all the way through 2019. But then we also did a little more research as far as the ADU situation, some of that. Someone asked me if, a couple of questions. Is there a way to tell how many part-time homes there are by the addresses that the bills are sent to? Because unless you live here 6 months or more, you're probably getting your bill wherever your permanent residence is. So is there some way of kind of finding out a little bit more about what's part-time or vacant by that method? Also, I had questions on why we didn't include any information on the situation with the COVID-19. This report basically is our data through 2019. I don't think any of us know what effect the COVID-19 is going to have on anything here at the moment. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know what effect it's going to be. There's people here where family members have moved home from college and stuff. So we may, if we look at water use data over the last couple of months and going forward, we might see some changes in water use because people are home and because family members have moved home. But that's not part of this report because this is data that we know at this point or think we know. I think Tom did a good job explaining all of this. So
yeah, I'd second that point on COVID-19 because we don't know if it's a short-term, how short-term or long-term it is, but the effect it has right now in the last couple of months is, I don't think that is going to be this, going to go on. For instance, the commercial use must have taken a huge hit, say in April. Restaurants closed, restaurants closed. Most of the motels are open, but almost no one there. That probably had that's a one-off in a way. I don't think things are even now seem to be getting back a little more towards a normal usage. And as Karen was saying, all sorts of different patterns in residential, potential residential use, because you had part-timers. I know personally of some cases where part-timers came here to live basically full-time, but then there are some people who are part-time who just never were here, who used to come here. There were some people, kids moving back. I know of that. A lot of people staying home probably quite a bit more than they normally would. So you probably might have a little bit of an uptick in residential use. for a while at least. But again, this all may fade. And we're talking about a 20-year planning process that we're doing this in preparation for. This is supposed to anticipate what the use is going to be through 2040. So I just don't think we want to let things get too skewed by what is probably a short-term event.
I would agree. I would agree. Paul, you had a comment?
Yeah, I more to do with the part-time versus full-time, situation. I guess what I would like to at least go on the record saying is that if someone purchases a home here and they have a water meter, they have a right to access that water, just like if someone's going to use it for part-time or full-time use or whatever their intentions are. And so I think it would be pretty short-sighted to not plan on making it so that if someone is purchasing a home, it's considered a full-time home. I mean, if you have 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and a nice driveway, I mean, it's capable of being a full-time home. And for us to speculate that it's going to be anything less than that is speculation, is what I'm saying.
Yep.
But
I
I have one comment on that though.
Sure.
Yep.
The reason we want to make the distinction though is to predict use, overall use. The problem with, if we don't know, we know that there's X number of residential connections, and that's the categories. It's like single family residential, multiple, but they're residential. There's no distinction in what the CSD calls a connection between whether the people are there all the time or they're part of the time. And the problem is that if we're trying to get a sense of how much water is going to be used, you basically have to do a calculation based on the number of people who you think will be here, equivalent number of people for a year. So if you have, because water, except for some landscaping, in Cambria, it's not as big a factor as it is elsewhere, hotter parts of the States, except for some landscaping, water is people. Water use is determined by how many people you have and their personal needs. So if you have, say, 2/3 of the people here are full-time and 1/3 are part-time, you have an overall number per connection for use, say of X amount. Well, your per connection is pretty obvious, but you don't know how many of those connections are people, let's say, who are here all the time, and how many connections are there for people who say maybe are here 30% of the time. So your actual sense of how much each person uses out of that total is very difficult to determine unless you know kind of how much on average people are here. So that's the reason we do it. We're not sort of saying that people, there's no sense of like second-class citizens or anything. It's just that we need to know what people use here personally. And if you have, say, 500 more people, you can kind of figure out how much more water you're going to have based on that. But the problem with a community like this is what the census number gives you is the population is only deals with about 2/3 of the units. So there's a large number of people who are here who are not counted in the census, essentially. So we're trying to figure out how many of those are so we can figure out a true per capita number, basically. Brad, you were going to say something, I'm sorry.
No, I was just after you were done. But yeah, we had talked about this in our little committee when I purchased my home. I think it was 2015, and got water set up under our name for our water meter. The question was asked by the CCSD at that time of me whether we were full-time or part-time. When I called back about 3 years later and said, well, we're going from part-time to full-time, they said, oh, we don't care about that anymore. It might be something worth looking into that we do care about that.
Yeah.
Going forward, and we can, when people set up their water meter or their water invoicing for their property, that should be a question I think that should still be asked.
I would suggest it might be a good survey question to ask people. Just, are you a full-time resident? Is this your legal residence? Just send out a thing with the bills and say, if you're not, are you here? How much, are you here part-time? And I think you just have to ask people if they're part-time, because you can ask them maybe how much time on average they spend. You don't want to get too detailed about it, but you can ask people probably and get some survey information that would help sort that out. Because the census is, the census just has this category called vacant, which is like covers everything from vacation rentals to true vacant, vacant houses to part-time houses, and it doesn't distinguish anything. But Cambria has a very large proportion of units that are called vacant, like about a third.
And a successful vacation rental could use a lot of water.
And vacation rentals on average use about what a residence uses.
Mhm.
I mean, a regular residence, it's roughly the same. So they use quite a bit, yeah.
Might also ask the question, if you're going to do a survey, is if they're part-time, are they planning on retiring here and becoming full-time?
Mhm.
There's a lot of us that are, well, I'm beyond baby boomer, I guess, but there's a lot of people who are getting close to retirement age that bought their homes with the intention of retiring here, and we don't know how many there are. And I think also when we're looking at future demand and looking at how much water is going to be available in the future for more connections, I think that we need to assume a worst case scenario that every home is full-time. And how much water would that be if you had an average number of occupants for a home? I think, what is it, 2.1 or something like that, if you figured 2.1. Because if we go ahead and build out and assume that everybody's going to be part-time, that's part-time now, and we have a drought, we may run into a situation where we don't have enough water for everybody that we have here. Worst case scenario, just a thought.
Well, to second that, I mean, we were talking with Pavo at the beginning of this whole process, and one of the things he brought up was demand hardening. And we could get so good with our rates being so high that people literally conserve to the nth degree that there is no flexibility. And then we're also to a point where we have just banked in on the fact that maybe half of our population is or more is not here full time. And that's not that doesn't seem like a good long-term planning way to go. So we need to, in my mind, whatever we're doing as far as planning, it needs to assume that we're a fully occupied
You
community.
need to have a cushion.
Yeah.
Well, cushion, yeah. I mean, that's one assumption. I mean, historically, we have not been that kind of community. Even back 40 years ago, most people, I mean, there were probably fewer part-time people, say 20 years, and we clearly fewer vacant units 20 years ago. But Cambria has always been, probably since it became, a fairly good-sized town, a vacation community for people or a weekend community for people. There have always been a contingent of part-timers. So it's probably never going to be like a bedroom community, say, or something like that, where almost no one's a part-timer. It's a big difference between, say, here and, say, Templeton. You look at yeah.
I mean, I would disagree with that. I mean, when we're talking about the state coming in and talking about ADUs and AUD too, which is another, scenario that could come up to play. But ADUs, I mean, that's by definition saying we're trying to create workforce housing inside of an area. We're trying to create an optimized area. Why not at least account for what the current users are and make it kind of reflective of that? Because now we take the ADU scenario on top of it, and you've taken a home that may have been just counted in as a part-time home. That could be sold to someone that now turns it into an ADU, and you've got now literally two full-time residents sitting there. So that's just something to consider.
Well, I had a question about ADUs, which the question that was not answered. I don't think it has been answered actually yet. But we were wondering whether ADUs are going to be counted. Secondary units generally are going to be counted as separate connections, or are they going to be part of an existing connection? I don't think that question has actually been
legally. I've seen it.
Then it would go into the build out limit, and the build out limit is a separate connection.
The purpose and the what I've seen in other communities, the Santa Barbara, which has had a major issue. Well, I would just say it has had a major transition in this process. You did not have to add an additional connection. The idea is that you can create a granny unit off of your home, and it's a person basically staying in an additional.
If that's true, then if that's the case in San Luis and I believe it is the case actually, I think you're probably right here, then you'd have more usage per connection out of ADUs, and that would actually, again, be greater demand within the build out rather than, in other words, within the same number of units, they'd be using more water. So that's the question that also has to be settled as to how you're going to account for them. Because you're going to have some of them here.
Yeah, that's true. I think the county, what they've currently settled on has two different things. One, I think it's based on connection to that existing structure, and the other one is square footage as to whether they need a new connection or not.
Right. Okay, that's interesting.
And also the county's current thing still has to run by the Coastal Commission and another agency, and I forget what that agency is, before they can apply it properly to Cambria. So
it may be the Water Quality Control Board that would have to do with waste disposal. The Coastal Commission is taking up, and I think this summer we're supposed to. Yes, you can. Yeah.
Okay, so I looked up the Coastal Commission's guidelines, and it's still a draft, and they're hoping to get it settled and approved some point during the summer. I also contacted the Resource Water Quality Control Board, and I got an email back from Matt Keeling, and he said that ADUs could become an issue for parcels connected to Cambria's municipal wastewater treatment facility if either the collection, the treatment, or the disposal system starts to approach their design flow and their treatment capacity. But in that kind of a situation, that was the only way that they would have any problem with it.
And that's less likely than the water supply.
Yeah,
water supply pinch. I mean, the water supply is tighter than the wastewater.
Yeah, the wastewater is
pretty
way big enough to handle lots of stuff. So Brad, you wanted to chime in at one point? You still have?
No, I do.
Okay. Does anyone from the audience want to chime in on this?
I think Cindy and Crosby.
Yes, I do have 2 requests to speak. I will dial in Cindy Stidel.
All right.
Cindy, go ahead and unmute yourself. Okay, we'll also dial in Crosby and see if he's ready.
Okay.
Crosby, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, we're good.
Okay, you do have 2 for the price of 1 here. This is Laura Swartz. The question I had is, the question for water is not only for part-time or full-time, it's also occupancy laws of how many people are in specific houses and how is that going to increase? As you can see, some houses have many more people than the average in it. And how is that going to affect your water use as we go forward?
Okay, good point. Thank you.
Yeah, just to double onto that is with the economy and the way I don't want to predict or be an economist, but looking at the way things are going, things are probably going to be a tough couple years. And that being said, you have people coming home and staying with mom. It's probably going to be a trend that we will see. And I'm only making reference to that, not that we would plan around that, but that you would want to have that kind of buffer in whatever plan you have so that you can accommodate it. I guess.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think the consultant is certainly going to take that in. In fact, I think the state guidelines on doing that report is probably going to say, okay, you got to have some kind of buffer in there, not just for a regular season, but also for a drought season. So we'll see what becomes of that. We haven't been able to get Ms. Stidel on.
No.
Okay. General Manager Weigold has his hand up, so let's go to him.
Hi again. So I was just going to chime in on after Tom's discussion around usage around the COVID crisis here. So we now brought in our data as of Friday afternoon from the billing cycle, and it was stunning in that there was very little difference in the billing from the January-February period. As expected, our commercial accounts were down, but our residential accounts more than made up for it quite a bit. So out of a typical billing cycle of about $1.1 million total revenue, we were off about $50,000. Surprisingly, also the vacation rentals were almost dead on within $1,000 of the previous billing cycle.
Okay, so
So we
commercial
don't know a lot of
obviously
the
was
data
down
behind that, but
because, yeah.
we
Yeah,
know
so
the
commercial
usage.
was down and residential was up, which makes sense. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me.
But
Okay,
from a resources standpoint, what saved the commercial accounts a little more was the fixed cost component, not the usage.
right, right.
So the way we're organized right now prevents a shock to the system because of that.
Yeah, that certainly helps sustain our, and the reason that's done is so that we can sustain operations with the base amount, even if our usage does sink precipitously, like like it has on the commercial side. So, all right. So this report, I think, is still a draft, obviously, but I think the reason we wanted to look at it again was so that we could forward it on to the consultants when they come on board. And I'm not positive, not being a parliamentarian, whether we can do that informally. I think since it's still a draft, I think we can, unless somebody objects to that, that we can just make it available to them. I mean, it's already out on the website, and an updated version should be posted on the website. So I think we've accomplished that by doing so. Any comment on that? Yes, Tom?
Just a question on that. Can the committee do that directly, or does it have to go through the CCSD board of directors?
Well, we can go through the board at the second meeting this month. I can include it in our R&I committee report and just ask them to let the consultant know that it's available for their edification. So I think that'll work unless somebody has objection to that. Yes, Ms. Dean.
Okay, so has everybody on this committee read the report, and does anybody have any questions on anything we wrote or any argument with anything we wrote? I mean, is everybody okay with this enough to forward it, or does someone have something they need to ask us to explain further or change or whatever? I mean, that's what we're doing, is we're reviewing this, right?
Right.
I just want to say I think it was really well done. And especially considering, it looking at what time we're in right now, it's fairly timeless too. It's good stuff. So I don't have any, I know that I was kind of talking about a lot of different things, but I do think it was a good report.
Well, I think we need to give Tom kudos for his excellent report writing skills.
Thank you.
Yeah, I commend all three of you for doing a good job of getting, presenting basically the facts, okay, and not speculating more than necessary. And then at the end, asking good questions. These are the things that we still don't know that are out there that we need to either clarify, or we're going to have to make a best educated guess as to what's going to happen with that. So I commend all three of you for doing an excellent job.
Thank you.
Also, with the references at the bottom that you used, that I'm sure will help the consultants. They'll know where you got your information from, and they'll be able to reference that and go to it if they decide to. So without objection, I'll go ahead and include that in my report to the board of directors, and we'll get it available to the consultants as they would like to use it. All right. That wraps up regular business. We are now on to future agenda items. Anybody else have a future agenda item? I've got the one from Crosby Schwartz, but anyone else have something that they think ought to be on the future agenda? Paul?
You know, I wanted to bring up rain barrels or rain storage on site as a potential thing that our committee could discuss or create an ad hoc for. And I don't know if, you know, that it seems like it kind of can be its own subject, or it could be a policy or something that we could move towards. I'm just looking at you know, after all of the discussions that we've had, and we're looking for this sort of battery of water to get us past the dry season. And if we could figure out a way to make it so that ratepayers are kind of working with the district and figure out a way to incentivize that, I would say that would be a lot better than where we're at right now, which is kind of more of we wait for a crisis to take place and then we respond, and that's not necessarily cost effective for anybody. So that's I personally started entertaining the process of getting rain barrels on my property, is why I bring it up, and it is looking pretty enticing as far as just what it would be for a solution for my situation. So
I think we have a committee that is supposed to be tackling this kind of technology, right? I mean,
It kind of ties in with the gray water.
Gray water, yeah, the gray water.
yeah, gray water and,
Gray water
and all
conservation.
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right.
So who is that ad hoc
I think
committee?
I might be on. Am I on that with you, Brad, or am I making that?
No.
Nope,
Oh,
no,
Jim's
I'm not.
on it.
Okay.
He's got his hand up too. So, all
Over here.
right. So maybe it's all three of you.
I don't mind joining with you guys.
Jim
And
and Brad.
Jim and Brad?
I think it's just Jim and Brad. And then Brad and Paul are supposed to be doing that informational video
We're
Yeah.
supposed to be, yeah, when we can not have to distance.
and not wear a mask for the video. Okay, so I know that there's going to be an IGA update meeting coming up pretty soon. So in our next meeting, can we get an update ourselves on where things are with the IGA? You know,
Yes,
as a report
absolutely.
from that meeting?
Absolutely. We'll get a report from the meeting.
Okay.
Harry had a question, it looked like.
Harry has a question? Yep. Okay. Haley, can you let Harry speak? Harry, there you go.
My fault.
Yes, sir. President Farmer.
Please don't say it like that, okay?
Okay.
No, I
You're
just want,
speaking as Harry Farmer, resident, right?
thank you. I just want to make, just want to ask a question with regard to a comment that Tom made during his presentation. I'm sorry, I'm going back to that regular business item, if you don't mind, where he said that vacation rentals use as much as full-time residents. So my question is, since a full-time resident is here, is someone that's here 7 days a week, a vacation rental person is here maybe, or group of people are here, let's say 2 days a week, maybe 3 max. So are people that are here 2 or 3 days using as much as people that are here 7 days? I mean, I'm asking, is it a quantity comparison with regard to water usage? Or are you breaking it down as well as a time spent here usage? Does that make any sense what I just asked?
Yes, it does. Tom, unmute yourself and answer up.
I think the answer is that vacation rentals are usually used by more than with a typical Cambria household, say it's 2 people. Vacation rentals are often used by several couples or families, whatever. They tend to have much larger occupancy for the short period of time they're used. So if they're used, a vacation rental is used on weekends, say maybe 30% of the month, but you have maybe 5 or 6 people rather than 2 people, that comes out to roughly the same thing. And I can go back and look. We have those numbers broken out, and I think in the consumption figures that you see that Elizabeth was doing, and then we extended those. That's also broken out. But the number of connections, the number of licensed vacation rental connections is something like 200. It's around 230, 240. and the amount of gallons per day basically used by a unit, by a connection, is roughly the same as the gallons per day used by all residential connections, which is another category. The residential connections, of course, include part-time as well as full-time. So a full-time residential connection, this gets back to the issue, trying to figure out who the part-timers are. We're assuming a full-time residential connection uses a little bit more than the average residential connection, because that residential connection total includes all the part-timers. So not to get too complicated, but a true full-time residential, connection probably uses a little more than a vacation rental. But if you average out all of the residential connections, including full-time and part-time, you get a per connection number, which is pretty close to the per connection number for vacation rentals. Do you follow that? Paul, I don't know. You follow
I follow it. I
yeah.
follow it. I had a question just on because
Yeah.
I happen to have had a conversation with Bruce Gibson about our vacation rental situation here in town that is, I'll just go ahead and describe it as wildly out of control. But you said that we have 200 per the CCSD, we have 200 vacation rentals that are
a little more than that. They're licensed vacation that are billed as vacation. They're billed. There's a separate billing category, and there's the licensed rentals that are used. There are a lot of obviously informal rentals going on.
That's what because I was going to. Well,
those are included in the residential category.
Well,
I mean, yeah,
but in this, so the CCSD is having like in the 200 range. The county has on record 400. So I guess what I'm saying is like there might be even a discrepancy between.
Well, okay, there are a lot of I know of some cases of it personally, but a fair number of people who are full-time residents have a vacation rental license on their property. They keep it for two reasons. One is if they want to sell the property, it's great to have that license. Two, it keeps someone else within 200 feet of starting a vacation rental themselves. There's quite a bit of, I know several people who do that, so I bet it's pretty common, but those are counted in the county's total.
Yeah, okay,
And,
got it.
and so the active vacation rentals that the CCSD, and it's a little over 200, the CCSD bills are the ones that are used as vacation rentals and are not full-time residences. So
That's really
part, that explains part of the discrepancy.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll go ahead and weigh in a little bit here on vacation rental usage. Before we moved here, bought a house here and moved here, we did rent often. And we always rented for 5 days to 7 days. And when we went out to the website, Vacation VRBO, Vacation Rentals by Owner, calendar was always pretty full. I think these vacation rentals, especially from, let's say, late March until the end of November, maybe even now into December with the market going on, are pretty busy.
I think they're busy too now.
Yeah, I also have a friend who currently has a vacation rental, and he said to me that he rents it by week generally. Very rarely does he have anybody that comes in for just 3 or 4 days. So I think the usage of the vacation rentals is even higher than what we might suspect. It's certainly not an average of 2 or 3 days a week, I don't think. So
Airbnbs too.
Mm-hmm.
that's another subject. All right. Moving on, thank you, Harry Farmer, for your comment and brought up good discussion. Back to future agenda items. I've got 3 currently. Does anybody else have anything that they want to make sure is on the agenda for next time? All right. Very good. Then I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank everyone for coming, especially on a beautiful day like today. Please go out and enjoy the day.
I'm going to go back and sew masks.
All right. Have a good one.
Thank you,
Do it
everybody.
outside on your
Thank you.
deck.
Bye-bye.
Beautiful day.